Right. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Excited. Lots of stuff to jam on. I'm going to just take a quick moment to be sort of tweeting and sharing. Good morning, Rebecca.
Hey, good morning, all. How's it going, Gregory?
It's going great. Yeah, I'm so excited to be back in the this week's space after being out in Greenland last week, which was amazing. Excited to share back a little bit with the community about what was moving.
Yeah, I want to hear about it. I feel like I have visions of all of the lichen in my head from your time. I'm looking forward to hearing about it myself. Awesome. Well, want to be sure to give our um, folks time to get in. I know that we've got Tim from TGI joining. We've got, I already see Sophia out there from Bren School. We've got White Buffalo team coming on board. So excited to give everybody a few minutes. So, Gregory, if now is a good time to share some reflections from that trip, it might give everybody a chance to get logged in and up.
100%. Yeah, I'd love to share, and yeah, super excited for to hear from Jesse and Tim on multiple fronts. But yeah, I'll dig in and just share a little bit about what was moving in Greenland. Maybe also just do a quick overview of some of the things that are flowing in the Regen Network sphere. There's an awful lot going on in governance, and so I'll just sort of briefly touch on some of that as well, and then we can sort of shift into the main event, which is the people on the ground doing the real work. So yeah, so I was invited to go to Greenland on a trip that was bringing together activists and blockchain industry leaders, and I think there was sort of two main dimensions of conversation and sort of like creative dialogue and engagement. One was on, so Greenpeace was represented, as well as some folks from Ecuador involved with Regen Network and other people who had concerns about blockchain technology, the way that it shows up in the media, the potential issues with proof of work, right? So there was that constituency. There was Web3 representation from Regen Network, a number of different dApps in the space, as well as two of the sort of top 10 market cap coins were represented, Solana and one I'm not sure if they're wanting to be named. The other one who is sending representation, I think they're trying to stay low key about it, but um, it was really interesting, right? So we were having dialogues and conversations while up on the ice sheet, while watching the glaciers calving, while learning about the struggles and opportunities in Greenland. And it was organized by some really amazing folks who had previously brought industry leaders together around the issues surrounding single-use plastics and plastic pollution. And they'd really had success in bringing people to sort of have an experience. They actually brought leaders out to the gyre, the great plastic gyre, and they brought activists and industry leaders to that space, and had so much traction, and so many of the conversations moved in a way that they weren't moving in the other venues that people were engaging, that they sort of felt that it might be worth trying to replicate that kind of momentum building in this kind of contentious space between blockchain, carbon markets, activists, proof of work, proof of stake, and then just this bigger mission that we're all in the refi space, regenerative finance space, around how are we transforming financial systems and monetary systems with this technology. So it was very dynamic. It was very rich. I have to say, it pretty much blew away any of my expectations, and I learned a lot. And also, it really helped me hone my understanding of how Regen Network can be the most kind of neutral and empowering for the larger space, and like what our role is, and maybe some of what our role isn't in the space. So yeah, I'm just coming away with a lot of motivation and clarity and gratitude for the experience. Oh, I see Casson hopped in. I totally, Casson, I want to bring you in to just say hello and meet people. I see John is out there. If you guys want to pitch in and just share a little bit, love to get your voices in here. And then, yeah, we can sort of take it from there. And just note, Casson and John, I think we'll probably keep this section where we're sort of doing a quick revamp of Greenland fairly short, and then we'll be cycling into some conversations with some of the folks who are doing land stewardship and methodology development, and dig in from there. So Casson, welcome. Casson's one of the really interesting people that I met along the way. He's done amazing work with Sea Shepherd, with Greenpeace, linking Web3 to activists, helping fund environmental activism. Yeah, Casson, welcome to Regenerati News Hour. I'm so grateful that you decided to hop in.
Oh, absolutely, man. Thanks for posting this link and for inviting us. And thanks so much for coming to Greenland. As Greg mentioned, my background's in environmentalism. I've been working in environmentalism as a professional activist for the last 20 years. And over the last several years, my focus has really been in this intersection between environmental causes and blockchain, harnessing the power of Web3 to empower the great causes of the world. And I worked on the ocean plastics event that Greg alluded to earlier, as well as on the Greenland trip. And I just wanted to pop in to thank you all for showing up there. I think I learned more from Greg and from Regen maybe than from anyone else on the trip. I think what you all are doing is so important to exactly the kinds of discussion that we were hoping to frame when we built and designed the Greenland trip. So it was invaluable to have Regen representation there. So I really just want to acknowledge my appreciation on behalf of myself, as well as on behalf of the rest of the planning team, for everything you do, for taking the risk to join us, and for everything you brought to the experience. And I look forward to continuing to learn more about Regen and work together as we move forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casson. And hopefully we're going to get to intersect here in the near future with some of the stuff happening down in Colombia and beyond. So thanks for, all the efforts that you put in to pull us together, and to, really, I think, rooting the conversation from the activist perspective. So to the best of our ability to have that voice of Mother Earth present at all times. Just kudos for anchoring things in that way. I'm really grateful for that. John, do you want to just share a little bit? John was from Spark Eco, was also on the trip, and it was great to get to know him better and learn more about the stuff that he's doing with solar and renewables. And yeah, John, feel free to introduce yourself and just say hello.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's great to hear your voice. Great to hear Casson's voice. Yeah, it was really really a tremendous experience, and I think there's going to be so much that comes out of it. But just having been on the expedition with 25 amazing people was really eye-opening and heart-opening experience. I think. I mean, you just mentioned that we have to make sure that Mother Nature has a seat at the table, and I think that's something I fundamentally think about at times, but I think that there's like a whole new level to that coming away from this trip, that like in every conversation, like we've got to open up a chair and like let the earth speak too, through us and through the work that we do. And, I think it's a particularly powerful place to really feel and see the impacts of climate change. And I would sort of encourage everyone to find those places and to really keep your eyes open and hearts open to the world around you, because climate change, I'm gonna guess everyone on this space, is aware it's happening, it's real, but like there's this next level where it's like you really embrace it and you begin to, I think we all have to begin to do just a little bit of mourning and grieving of like what we're losing, but also use that as our energy and force for all of the work that we're doing. And so thanks for having me up. But yeah, it was really, really an amazing trip and such a blessing to be on it.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Feel free to stick around. And, I think I'm going to pass the baton over to Rebecca and Jesse from White Buffalo and Sophia to sort of take this conversation to the next level, or to the next phase, really. But, before I do that, I just want to sort of presence that, I think one of the hardest and most important things that's happening, I think, in the Regen Network world is this question around how are we representing the voice of life, of nature, whatever we want to call it, in Regen Network itself and in the larger sort of economic system. And there's so much cool stuff. I know that there's been a couple spaces on this, but around rights of nature, around how are we actually creating sort of digital personhood, and how, what are the ways that that's showing up? How does that relate to eco-crediting? So I think there's a threat. I think if people are listening, this conversation is going to shift to on the ground work that's happening, like the work that Jesse is doing to steward a landscape and to listen to that landscape, to regenerate that landscape, to build community around that landscape, I think is actually directly related to this question that we were holding in Greenland around, can we listen to what life is telling us with the big changes that are underway and sort of respond. So, I want to pass it over to Rebecca for you to kind of, host these amazing folks in the community, and I'll chime in as needed.
Awesome. It sounds like the reflections from Greenland, I know they breathe a lot of life into our day to day when we think about the goal specifically of our work with R&D, but with the community more broadly. So that was great to hear. Thanks for sharing. What was swirling around in my head when I was thinking about it and about this group today is regenerative potential, and the idea of us not being able to put all the data or all the limitations or all the standards around what's possible in regenerating these ecosystems of the world and the communities that live off of them. And so I want that to kind of be our guidepost as we think about threading not only the work that R&D does, but with all of the regenerative land management in the world, all the science being collected, the different opportunities in refi and approaches to financing, that there's this regenerative potential that I think we're all feeling around in the dark a bit to get a handle on. And that's why I love having these conversations here with you, Jesse, with others that are on the ground, because no one really knows the regenerative potential of a place if you don't have an intimate relationship with it. So just having gone out to visit Halama Canyon Ranch a few months ago, myself, you start to unpack the sheer complexity of what it takes to take a landscape from a baseline point to a more regenerative point in time. So for starters, love to just have you up, Jesse, and tell us what's going on at White Buffalo and Halama Canyon these days, and kind of a share for everybody in the group about who White Buffalo is, and certainly love to dig into really what I see as this intersection of regenerative land management and science, and kind of how the data that's being collected is generating an understanding around not only the science of what's happening in these different mechanisms on the ground, but the management decisions and the shift in policy, and ideally being able to generate credits off of them. So come on up.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Gregory. Thank you all for having us into this conversation. It's one that we're always trying to find on a grander scale. So much of our work here locally, we're based in central southern kind of coastal California, just in northern Santa Barbara County, and so much of our local conversations hasn't quite kind of reached this phase of intersection between kind of regenerative land stewardship and the kind of emerging Web 3.0 ecosystem and how they can be in service to each other. And our organization, White Buffalo Land Trust, is a nonprofit that is really working to practice and promote and further develop these systems of regenerative agriculture, really contextualized in our place in our ecoregion, but working with kind of regional partners to set forward a framework that can be applied on a global scale, where people anywhere in the world can approach this work and ask the right questions and self-discover the right kind of tools to be able to better invest in their land and their community. And the land base in question that Rebecca referenced is a 1,000-acre ranch. We're right near about 8 to 10 miles away from Point Conception. So think of the elbow of California, that kind of interstitial space between Northern California and Southern California. We're a bundling of different ecoregions, of different soil types. We're a very diverse topographic region. So we have a lot of different soil types and different elevations, hydrological features. And so one of the things that really stood out to us is this kind of ongoing observation, monitoring, research in service of a deeper understanding of ecological health, looking through the lenses of soil and water and biodiversity and human systems. And something that I'm always kind of in discussion around and grappling with internally is whether or not the data itself really develops a deeper understanding, or is it just the language for better communicating our developing understanding. So so much really is rooted in direct experience and really feeling the shift in kind of how we understand the role of trees, both for humans and for livestock, how we understand the role of living ground cover in production systems like vineyards and orchards, how we understand the impact on native grasses from appropriate kind of timing and rest of grazing systems, and all of that can in some semblance be quantified through data collection and research projects, but those are very narrowly focused on certain indicators and metrics and only tell a small portion of the story. And it really comes back to the human element to kind of embody what is observed and what is learned and what is experienced, to better inform the way that we show up and the decisions that we make. But the data itself.
Wait, Jesse. So you're telling me we can't just have the computer tell us what to do?
I was wondering how long it would take for you to pick up on what I was putting down, Greg. it's a sad state of affairs, because it would be great to just automate a drone that turns on turns on some valves here and there and opens some fences, and it all just works out for the better. But it's hard to picture a world in which agriculture is not a direct evolving relationship between humans and landscapes, and it requires more of us, not less of us. But what the data and what the information and what the machine learning and the AI and the remote sensing, what all of that can do is really magnify, in both directions. It can magnify the higher potential of our kind of positive compounding and cascading decisions, and it can also do the same for our negative degrading decisions. So we have to be very cautious around how we apply technology in the context of living systems to make sure it is appropriate for the desired outcomes. And that's really where.
Wait a second. So we can't just like ride this rocket ship straight to the moon to some automated perfect future? You're telling me that we need to participate in regeneration, Jesse?
Well, we can do that, but it might not be a perfect future for humans. It might be quite a technological dystopian future that I sure don't want to be raising my kids into. So I think I think that you're right, man. We've got to really take a step back and think hard around what we're asking of the future, because I think that it's easy to um, forego the real potential that we are slipping into a different realm than what we are expecting we're doing. And I think that also, to Rebecca's point is like, when we talk about ecosystem service payments and credits and the data and information that backs up that value creation and exchange, that's where in the history of humanity, where there is value to be found, to be seen, to be recognized, there seems to have been a track record of extraction and exploitation. And I would caution us to not be naive to the fact that that might also be looming on the horizon if we are to come to a point in which it's very easy to say, hey, this practice over here increases water infiltration in this soil type X amount. This installation over here increases biological diversity and activity in this certain species of butterfly, bee, or bird, X amount. And here's an organization or an entity or a program that's going to pay, Y for X. Well, what does that do when you start creating those incentives? Is the inherent outcome to that only to the betterment of biodiversity and water systems and carbon systems, or are there other pieces that essentially get traded and degraded in service of that kind of financial remuneration for the biological or ecological improvement? And hence why we always have to continue to bring kind of the holistic understanding of land and ecology, as well as the human factor into the equation when we think about this. And this is not an easy question, but it's one that we are committed to walking through, and is not going to end tomorrow. There is no, regenerative potential that we can perfectly paint an outline of, and that and an expected date to completion. And as you were kind of talking about that regenerative potential, Rebecca, it reminded me of um, a recent experience in which I was able to witness a rainbow, and it was the first time I had seen the end of a rainbow on the like near side of a horizon. You know how it always seems to like kind of fall just out of sight, just over the tree line, just over the hill. This one was on the near side, like it was right in front of us, but you could never really get to it. It was just like this halo. It was this outline. It was this like, this dust, on the horizon, even though you could see it. And I think that that's what we always have to continue to be chasing, is this higher regenerative potential.
That's quite the picture there. I'm imagining it now. It's something that, as someone that has collected data in the field and had these epiphany moments about what data reveals, I feel like we as humans have this awkward relationship with data, where we love it, we want more and more and more. It's like we just have this taste for it, but it's a conundrum also if we think about, there is already a lot of knowledge in the brains of indigenous communities and farmers throughout the world, that they don't need data to prove that something is regenerative. So it's this interesting spot that we're in with really needing, we do need to have this like proof of what is regenerative. I was just on a call yesterday meeting some folks that are doing Regenerate America Coalition to make policy recommendations to push regeneration in the Farm Bill. And what they need is, there is a need for data to show what's gonna support producers and create more resilient systems. But then there's this intimate knowledge of a place that you really can't quantify, that goes into management decisions. So I certainly appreciate with y'all's work at Halama, where it's this relationship with data that I feel like is really great to see modeled elsewhere. And two, like, I know with Sophia, with y'all's work, really this talented, activated crew of grad students that are doing um, data collection on the ground, looking at like water and soil moisture and remote sensing, really also like playing that game of what is the role of this data and how does it live and move, and and also like what's the life cycle of it, so it begins by an exploration, a hypothesis, and then it moves into shifting management decisions. And then how awesome to be able to move it into the eco credit module where you would be able to like test what it could be, kind of put into project wise. So I'm curious to see where that weaves in, Sophia, with kind of, you guys are deep in the weeds of data, but you guys are working closely with White Buffalo and looking at really ecological health, in like kind of goal setting. So what are y'all's reflections around that at this early point in time in y'all's research?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me? Just wanted to make sure that my speaker's working.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so first off, thanks so much for having me on the call. It's actually perfect timing because just this past Monday, I was out driving around with Jesse at Halama Canyon, and really able to ground, all my understanding of the things I've been looking at from a computer screen through satellite imagery and actually being able to see it happening on the ground. But essentially, a lot of the things that were brought up already, I think, set up a great framework is understanding, right? There's so much data that exists, like you talked about, Rebecca. And more often than not, in the world of academia, we keep seeing this disconnect between, us scientists who are just coming to massive amounts of data. There's so much data out there from satellites, from different field surveys going on. But there's a disconnect between, the farmers and ranchers and land stewards who need more support in understanding not only one, what data exists, but more importantly, how to use it to direct this decision making. And as Jesse brought up, use it as almost a storytelling and communication tool to express what they're actually seeing on the ground. So what we've really been looking at is looking at the intersection between remote sensing and soil moisture and water. Again, this Halama Canyon Ranch is located in California, and as many of you probably know, we're going through a pretty drastic drought and also trying to understand how things are going to shift in the future with changing precipitation patterns. And so what we've been looking at especially is the intersection between some remote sensing resources, specifically a platform called EerieWatch, which is a remotely sensed platform which measures things such as evapotranspiration, soil moisture, soil water potential, and trying to understand how to support not only decision making in the land management decisions at Halama Canyon, such as more targeted irrigation plans, understanding when to rotate cattle and when, but also again for that storytelling aspect, understanding how regenerative agriculture and the practices they're taking are improving the overall ecosystem state. So we're at the very beginning of a year-long research project, which is actually my master's thesis, looking at this remotely sensed platform and understanding how it, again, can support these land management decisions, and also how can this cutting-edge technology really tell us this more holistic understanding of what's happening on land. And I think it's a really neat space to be in right now, also because, again, there's so much data out there. But really the hope is to work in the applied sciences space to figure out how can it be applied, and how can it support, these groups like White Buffalo Land Trust who are doing the good work, and also help them communicate these different approaches and different tools that exist to other land stewards that are not only in the local region, but in the larger space of regenerative agriculture practices. So it's a really great space to be in. And again, it was really wonderful to be out on the ranch on Monday to just see everything in person. And I think there's just a lot of great work to be done.
See it, smell it, taste it, I bet. Well, I'm curious, Jesse, for you. You're one of the few land managers in the world that is able to like explore data related to like management systems in like a really like innovative way. And like I want to know what that feels like to be able to have data to explore different opportunities for moving cattle, as well as, better use of water, and then, how that could be potentially, improving the landscape over time. Like, what does that feel like? Do you feel like more empowered by it? Do you feel like, just describe what that feels like as someone who's like really responsible for a landscape and ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of multiple kind of folds in that, both kind of time wise as well as looking at the purpose of our work. The value of what we're trying to do. I think that the first and foremost, there's the kind of data in service of our immediate kind of action plan, our ongoing management, and that ranges from kind of field collected data to remotely sensed data to and satellite and drone. One of the things we're really excited about and interested in is a company that is essentially providing irrigation scheduling through satellite data for both soil moisture, evapotranspiration for our vineyard. And it's just as simple as, here's your soil moisture. This is when we recommend you start irrigating, and this is how much we suggest you start irrigating. And whether we use it to an absolute T or we use it as one indicator in when we start our irrigation system or a season, or how long we irrigate, is another tool in the tool belt. So you're not at all times guessing how much water you put out and how much more you need to put out. And then there's kind of the reality of like what we're being asked to do as land stewards, farmers and ranchers these days. And it's a lot more from the companies or the businesses or the individuals we're selling to, but ultimately the end customer that's surrounding themselves with the products that are coming off our land bases. And so the story needs to be richer. There's no longer this assumption that there's an opaque veil between the kitchen table and the farm that the food came from. And so this data is really helpful in sharing more depth in the story of agriculture. And I think that it's going to be up to the audience of that to also be more understanding that changes are not done overnight. They're not linear on an upwards scale. There's complexity in the kind of causality of what metrics you're collecting, all that kind of stuff. But it's really amazing to be able to share with people, hey, look, we actually do have more perennial grasses in certain pastures, or more kind of abundance and health in our perennial grasses in some pastures, strictly by changing the time of our grazing herd, both in pasture and the time away from, to allow it to recover. And just those simple metrics that are observational and captured within certain protocols, like the EOV protocol, the Ecological Outcome Verification Protocol for Savory's Land to Market. They have these short-term monitoring sites throughout their property, and being able to tell that ongoing story year to year, both on package as well as kind of in data, is really valuable. So that you're not just kind of giving a thumbs up and saying, "Trust me, I'm doing good." And I think that's a new. We're in a new age right now of agriculture, where positive ecological outcomes are assumed from farmers and ranchers who are promoting either organic or regenerative or sustainable. And we need some data to really show that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a group that we're working with, Ned and I. I'm trying to get Ned up here. He's on, but we're working with a group that's up in the Northeast United States, and it's a conservation district. We're really trying to figure out the potential of using a conservation district to funnel all of the different crazy and elusive funding mechanisms for producers, especially like smaller regenerative producers, to support them to really like incentivize that work through structures that they're already used to using. I'm wondering for y'all's work in the area that you're in, for a farmer that wants to either convert or maintain regenerative practices, like how thin are those margins? How tight is it to make that a reality? Can you paint us a picture?
Yeah, I mean, I just had this conversation with someone the other day in regards to kind of the trade-offs of transition. There's certain elements that you're reducing, say, tractor passes in a an orchard context. We've got an almond project, and the farmer was really excited about the potential of reducing the amount of tractor passes throughout the growing season, but that also increases the amount of investment in cover crop seed and a grazing herd. And a lot of times that transition is new. It is sometimes more expensive, and that can lead to more long term benefits, both financially and ecologically. But there is a concern. And that's where a lot of the data comes in. Is that, like, if there's no substantial evidence to show that what they're going to invest in is going to give them the results and the improvements that they are looking for, then it's a lot riskier endeavor. But if it's proven and there's enough people that have done it, then it's just good business. It's just best practice, and that's where really this data comes in. And to your point, the incentives, the funding mechanisms, the programs that are easing this. I mean, just organic has a lot of subsidized incentives for transition and cost share. But now we're seeing just this absolute host of new programs that are cropping up and practices that are being supported. I mean, you're talking cover crop, we're talking compost application, we're talking rotational grazing, we're talking hedgerows and riparian plantings and filter buffers and no-till and pasture seeding. Like, there's all these things that are now showing that there are possibilities for getting payments to make these transitions. Just here regionally, obviously we're a nonprofit organization, so there's a broader spectrum of programs, funding programs that are available to us as a kind of data monitoring, education, training nonprofit. But I think a lot of people have the misconception that a lot of the grants we get because we're a nonprofit. They are available to all producers. And for us, there's the California Healthy Soils Program. There is the NRCS EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. There are a host of USDA programs. There is now the food print grant program that's essentially reallocating 1% from restaurant sales into a pool of funding to support farmers in their transition. Everything from cover crop to compost and such. So there's mechanisms out here. What you just highlighted was a conservation district. I believe has a really vital role in both making land stewards in their region aware of the funding opportunities, as well as supporting them in accessing those funding opportunities, while also playing the technical assistance provider in the actual deployment of those programs. And that's so critical because so many people are just trying to make it through, that thinking about sitting down, writing a plan, writing a grant application, reporting on that grant application, finding the nursery stock or the cover crop mix and getting it, like, that's so hard for them to even fathom until it's just second nature and part of their management plan. So having those technical assistance providers is going to be critical.
Totally. Yeah. I'm reminded of my grandfather's word for this kind of thing. It's a racket, it's just so much to be asking already. So yeah, I agree. And I'm glad that, that resonates with you, this work with the conservation district. I'm particularly excited about just knowing that that's a structure that we want to play into instead of just expecting new structures to come up. And it gets me so excited because it's like this whole vision is before us of like what's possible for a producer to be able to work on their own, work with a project developer, work with work with their conservation district and have a lot of different opportunities to support themselves, whether that be starting off with an environmental stewardship to like get kind of onboarded and like figure out how all this works, collect some data about, about their space, about their landscape. And then if they want to pursue something else, if like having plenty of options, a multitude of options is going to be so, so critical. There are a couple of people that I want to be able to pull up too. Ned, please pipe in. I also see someone, I don't know if I can put you on the spot, but John Kemp, you're out in the audience and I'm a big fan. So if you have anything to offer reflections or questions, I just invited you up too. Sophia, go ahead. You've got something.
Yeah, I was just going to hop in really quickly. And another kind of component of this master's project that we've been working on, and we were chatting with Jesse about just on Monday. And I hear the open team phrase, collect data once and use it many times when I say this, but also just understanding, again, as Jesse brought up, the multitude of different, say, certifications or different paths that you could go down, say for getting, regenerative organic certified or, savory EOV. And another big thing that we're hoping to do is kind of create some sort of mapping exercise to understand, all right, what are the most common indicators that are being collected for each of these certifications and trying to visualize the overlap? Because I think that is a very powerful story to tell, especially with land stewards and farmers who are just trying to wrap their head around, all the different steps that it takes to make not only the transition to say regenerative, but what data even needs to be collected. So just wanted to chime in because I think that's a really important component in lowering the barrier to entry, is just creating some of these resource guides, because even for us, it was a big task to go through all these different certifications. So really trying to provide some of the resources on that front. But yeah, just wanted to hop in there and add that.
Like a cleaning up, like making something feel more available. And I love the idea of having these different advocates out there in the field whose job it is to really help get through the weeds. It is a lot to expect, and hopefully creating more approachable approaches will just enable more of these practices, because it really is like there are actionable steps in decision making and risks that have to be taken on the ground to move this forward. So being able to hold that for sure, Sophia. Yeah. Ned, John, Jesse, who else? I'd love to create space in these last 15 minutes.
Hi, this is John. I have a challenged cell phone connection, which is why I didn't volunteer to be a speaker, but I've been enjoying the last few minutes of conversation. I joined late. And so the one thought that I will contribute is there is a tremendous need in this emerging space of regenerative agriculture for leaders and for people who can support others and coach others through the transition process. There's obviously a need for trusted technical advisors, which is what I spend most of my time doing. But it's been interesting to observe and for me to learn that the people who are the most effective at producing change, both in their operations and in others, really has nothing to do or very little to do with their technical knowledge. Instead, it has everything to do with the place that they come from within. When they are able to engage with others, other growers, other producers, from a place of deep empathy and caring and understanding, people are able to really hear them, and they're able to make an impact that is entirely disproportional to the technical knowledge that they have. So this is such an important point. There's this quote from Bill O'Brien that I posted on the blog some time ago that I really like, and I'll paraphrase it a bit. Essentially, he says that the outcome of an intervention has nothing to do with the skills of the intervener. It has everything to do with the place within from which the intervener comes. And when we think about trying to stimulate or motivate people to make different choices, that fundamentally is an intervention. And the outcomes of those interventions are going to be based on whether those people can perceive and can tell how much we care about them. And this was really brought home for me when looking back through the historical podcasts and those that are most listened to, those that I get the most feedback about. The couple of podcast interviews that I had with Michael McNeil are extraordinarily popular. And trying to understand that, Michael said things that, depending on who would have said the things that Michael said, would really have turned people off. They would have found it offensive and they would have stopped listening. Michael said things like, "Stop poisoning your land," and like very blunt, very direct phrases. But yet, his episodes are so popular because people can hear and can sense that Michael deeply cares about them, that he deeply cares about farmers and the growers that he works with. And when that caring came through, that resulted in a complete change of the way people were perceiving his message. So I'll put that out there as an addition to the conversation.
I think that's a marvelous addition to the conversation. My query back to you would be that we have this innate kind of human drive to be empathetic to those that we're with and have relationship to. But in this world that we live in now of Web3, and I feel like I know Gregory well, even though I've never met him in person, and so I have like an empathy and a care for him as a human, and that it's possible for us to create that as a decentralized community of caring, that we have care for each other and care for these ecosystems. So do you see it possible? I see it possible, and I hope others do, that we can engender that level of care and empathy around regeneration on like multiple tiers, like layered with openness. I even think about Heiss, Regen Foundation. He's on the call. Like he's someone that I see as like engendering lots of empathy and care into his work with smallholders. So others pipe in. John, reply some of my thoughts back.
Well, yes, I agree with you. I absolutely believe that it's possible to evoke these types of connections in an online media without a deep personal relationship. While the personal relationships make those types of connections significantly more powerful, the example that I gave of Michael McNeil on a podcast interview, a purely audio media, listened to by tens of thousands of people who have never met Michael in person and will never get to see him in their lifetime, most likely, were able to really hear what Michael had to say in a very deep and inspiring way. And so I think the answer is absolutely yes. And we live in a world of increasing opinion polarization, whether those are political opinions, healthcare opinions, whatever they might be. There is this pronounced polarity. And it is crippling to our society, and it's crippling to our agricultural community to constantly divide ourselves into us and them. Can we really have empathy with someone who farms in a manner that is the exact opposite of the ideal that we strive for? And if I'm an advocate for regenerative agriculture and I see someone, speak with someone who is growing genetically modified corn and doing multiple applications of Roundup and using anhydrous ammonia and using tillage on arable soils and washing soil downstream, can I really have empathy with them and meet them where they are? My capacity to have empathy with people who have a different point of view or a completely opposing point of view to my own is going to be directly relevant to my capacity to create change in that person's life and in my own.
Totally agree. That's a great point. Thanks, John. Gregory, absolutely. Ed, we've got a question from you too. Go ahead, Gregory.
Well, thanks, John, for your words. And I just wanted to sort of like loop it back to where Jesse was starting us. And maybe even prior to that, when we were just doing our report back on this recent trip to Greenland, and this is sort of one of the deeper ethical and philosophical questions that we've always grappled with, I think, pretty openly in Regen Network, which is around agency, intrinsic motivation. John, I think you spoke really beautifully to, where is the intent coming from? Is this coming from love, or is this coming from sort of an extractive assumption, or even just a sort of like an automation assumption, right? So how are we viewing humans? And this really cuts to the core of some of the big questions in regenerative finance and this idea that we can incentivize, that we can create economic value from regenerative actions and outcomes. And when we start down that path and we start, there's all the technical conversations, right? And I think we were having many of those. How do we prove that soil is getting healthier? How do we align farmer observation and the scientific side of that, the data side of that, the intuition and the connection side of that, with also the greater social question, which is, as a society, how are we going to be valuing these public good outcomes? Water retention, carbon sequestration, biodiversity. And, we're faced with this question of, are we going to assume that humans are only making decisions based on their short-term economic outcomes, or that they oftentimes or sometimes do that? How holistically are we holding humans as agents in the system, and how does that relay or sort of parlay into our design assumptions building something like Regen Network? And this is such a fundamental question. I'm super excited that we're having it in a public space, right? And that it's something that continues to circle. I think you can look back at the governance forum even, and there's been various cycles of exploration of this. And ultimately, I always come back to, we can and should value our farmers, our land stewards, for regenerative outcomes. But also there's this cautionary tale where we don't want to just sort of assume that they're automatons. And, Jesse was inviting us to have some caution about just, if X, then Y, if X, then Y. There needs to be this sort of deeper place where we're revisiting these questions together, and we're kind of regenerating the spirit of how we're coming to it. So it's just sort of echoing this, and thanks for continuing to bring it up.
Gregory, I love your comments, and I think they're spot on. If I could put it into my own words, I think very deeply, fundamentally, the question is, do we as a society believe that humans on the landscape are parasites or are stewards? That's kind of the polarity, the polarizing, the opposite poles of the points of view of how people interact with the landscape. And what is the view that we hold collectively as a society? And really importantly, what is the view that we hold individually as agriculturalists, as farmers? Do we view ourselves as being stewards, or do we have an extractive relationship with the landscape where we essentially are behaving like parasites? And so we see with the climate change narrative, this fear propaganda that humans are parasites on the landscape. And I personally do not believe that to be true. I believe that we have unwittingly or uncaringly damaged ecosystems on an extraordinary scale, and that we also have the wherewithal and the capacity to truly function as stewards and to regenerate landscapes in an extraordinary way. When we look at all of the, for many, when they hold up an ideal for us to strive for, the ideal that we are to strive for goes back to Aboriginal landscapes, whether that's 400 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It's where do you set the benchmark in time? But when we stop to consider what created those extraordinary landscapes that existed then, they were actively being stewarded by people who cared deeply about the landscape. They were not wild and uncared for in the way that is sometimes commonly perceived. So, excellent thought. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, John. I'd love for Jesse, Ned, we've got about 5 minutes left. Love to give you guys some room, and if there's time, Ed, I'd love to circle back to your your question, but giving you some space to respond, Jesse, and share, Ned.
Well, I think that quickly realizing that 1 hour went a lot quicker than expected with people and minds in the room like John and Gregory. This has been a fantastic experience that I would welcome more of, because it often I think gets lost in the kind of functional layer of our everyday discussions. And it seems like every time I verge into these realms, into this territory, it can often be written off as, well, that's a philosophical discussion, as if that's not the discussion that we should be having. And so I think that fundamentally, there is this need for a philosophical discussion, so that we can come to not even shared or agreed upon. We don't need to agree on the facts. We don't need to agree on the direction we need to go. We need to agree on the level of discourse that we should be having. And from that, if we have an intention to get better, both personally, as well as our communities, as well as the land, then there seems like there's room for different theories of change to play themselves out. But it doesn't seem to be that there's a healthy discourse currently in the environment. And whether it be platforms like Twitter Spaces, or what was the other one, like Clubhouse, I felt like there's almost a harkening back to the age of like radio, where families would sit around the fire and actually just listen to healthy discourse and conversation, and have discussions about it and opinions about it. And instead of just having media wash over us, there's more of an active listening. It's like the equivalent media to reading. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciated this group coming together for a healthy discourse and conversation, and looking forward to more of it.
The sentiment goes both ways, Jesse, and it would be it would certainly be lacking, without having you involved in a conversation. So I'm really glad you could be here. Yes to absolutely more. Ned, I want to give you some space if you'd like to respond to anything or share some thoughts.
Yeah, I really don't have much to say. This has been fantastic. I haven't heard the word carbon, I don't think, once. And to me, that goes a long way. We're really addressing important issues here. Data, community, things like that. What are the roles of data? And research certainly came up as a big one. That there's a lot that we need to learn about what's going on, how these practices are impacting the environment. And I think a lot of these incentives need to encourage some of this data collection and data analysis and all that stuff. This kind of work that Sophia is doing. So anyway, this has just been a fantastic, very kind of inspiring, whatever these are, Twitter space thing.
These weird online spaces, yeah. I'm so glad. Well, in the last minute, Ed, I am happy to bring you up for your question or share to kind of round us out. So go ahead, Ed.
I want to add to what sort of John and Gregory have mentioned. Having started in the 60s, my getting into agriculture, my parents weren't into it. They were chemists. But I love nature. And the most frustrating part of loving nature and then not growing up on a farm and having to learn this stuff, was everything that I was being told to do to grow my sheep and the pasture I was working had skull and crossbones on it. And it's pretty hard to love your land and love nature and love your ecosystem, love your animals, and everything you're being told, they said, you had to kill. And so, as John sort of mentioned, I traveled around and had to meet people that had that compassion for their farm, and we're trying to do things different. And I think that's really progressed over the years, and that network of people that really care about their land and in a natural sense has really grown. And I think, as John also mentioned, the conventional farmers that are still using the skull and crossbones image basically in their farming, they also care about their land and passing on their farm to their children and making it better for the future. It's been such a long history of thinking that nature was competitive and that you had, the monoculture and all that. And so I think it is really important, and for the public to learn that too, that, it just extends out. I mean, the whole society needs to, as I think John really well said, needs to understand these things. And when we get to them by giving them the feelings that we have now of contentment with nature, that, they feel comfortable with us feeling comfortable, and it just changes everybody's attitude about it. Anyway, thanks for the time. Thank you.
Well said, Ed. Thanks for rounding us out, and I give a last shout out to all the other folks on here that are building with us. I see Ishmael and Sev. I see obviously we have Jesse on here and others. So big shout out to everybody always joining the conversation. Yaponti. So here's to more good work. If anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to stay on for an extra minute or two. But otherwise, we'll see you next time. And thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm gonna hop. It's been great. I always love our Regenerati News Hour. It's always so sort of fresh and getting straight to the heart of things. So really appreciated it. John, thanks for stopping by. Jesse, thanks so much for taking your morning with us. I know you're busy out on the ranch, so it's great to have you, and to be continued.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Much appreciated.
Have a great one.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye, everybody.